In Apologetics, we've been going over proofs of the existence of God, and we went over His attributes. Today we're going to look at the action of God in the world. In other words, we've established that we have a creator. And what does that mean? What is creation? What does the world around us, how did it get to be here? We've seen that the world has a first cause, and that the first cause is what produced the world. Everything in the world, you say, well, where'd that come from? Where did that come from? And all right, that came from here. Well, where did that come from? That came from here. And you have to go back to what we call a first cause. We established that in the very first or second lesson. We see that the world does not contain in itself sufficient reason to exist. The world could not have made itself. Therefore, the world must not only be produced, in other words, that it came from something, but it also has to be preserved. I mean, that it doesn't end. And that has to be done by a power outside itself. There's no power in the universe, in the world itself, or in creation that could continue the world's existence without there being something outside of it giving it that power, or using that power. And lastly, we've seen that the world is designed to serve man, to serve an end. And we haven't gotten yet to what that end is, but it is man. But the world was designed to serve an end, and therefore it requires a direction or a government that will guide it towards that end. We looked at this when we looked at the designer, that there is a design to the universe. So how did the world come to be? What other options are there in the world? Because we believe that the world was created by God, but there's a lot of people out there in the world who don't believe that. So we need to look at what they do believe so that we can show that they're wrong. So there are two false theories. There's only three theories you can come up with. That God created is the third one. But there are two false ones. And these theories are called materialism and pantheism. Materialism teaches that nothing exists but bodily being or matter, which is in the world as we see it. And that everything that is in the world is just a development from that original mass. You get to this idea, you hear among evolutionists and people like that about this primordial soup. You know, that it just everything came out of that, out of this slime, mud, whatever they call it, primordial soup. The first this group of chemicals or gases or whatever it was that suddenly gave life, produced life out of nothing. That's one idea of how the world came to be. Everything came from this floating mass of molecules, and they don't go into how molecules even came to be or whatever. Pantheism teaches that divine substance alone exists. There's nothing but divinity. And that the world and all things in it are outpourings or manifestations of that substance. That they're part of that substance. An outpouring is something that comes from it, but it still continues to be part of it. Like water, you pour it out on the table. It's an outpouring. But the water still continues to be the water. It's just, and it still continues to be part of the whole. It's just now spread over a larger area. So let's look at these two false ideas. Materialism. Nothing exists but bodily matter. There's no spiritual matter. There's nothing but material things. There's no spirit, no soul, and therefore no God. Matter is eternal and uncaused. That's their idea, that matter is uncaused. It always existed. It just is It is the motion of atoms through physical laws that which results in this motion that causes these atoms to group together to form bodies, molecules, which then become minerals, which become plants, which become animals, and so on. Now, materialism can't be true. Why? If matter alone existed, it would have to be self-existing. And self-existing beings must be necessary and contingent. We've already covered this. Something that is self-existing means it has the power in itself. And it has to be necessary. And it has to be infinite. It has to have always been there. So it doesn't depend on anything else. So, but if in the world there's none of these things. If the world is contingent, it does depend on other things. It is finite, not infinite. It had a beginning. It's composed. It's made up of parts. Therefore, it's not simple. And it's constantly changing. And as we looked at, that which has to be the first cause, that which is the designer of everything, has to be unchangeable. It has to be necessary. It has to be simple, not composed of parts. And it can't depend on anything else. So the world cannot be this self-existent thing. If materialism were true, then mind and matter would be the same. Or rather, the mind would be a phase or a development of matter. Because you have plants that don't think, and you have animals and then human beings who do, so it has to be a development of something, which was originally matter. But matter always has extension. The mind does not have any extension. The mind can deal with things that transcend the limits of matter. You can dream. You can have dreams. You can have ambitions. You can have desires that are beyond what you can do right now. And you can actually put those dreams into effect. That's beyond matter. Matter is what you can do. Physically, you can only do this, but you can dream of something beyond that. There are no limits to what the mind can do. But there are limits to what material things can do, what matter can do. See, so the mind can transcend it. It can think of things like unity. It can think it can comprehend things like truth. Where does truth exist in matter? Goodness. Humor. Honor. Ideals. All of these are beyond the material world, beyond matter. These are things from the mind, but the mind can put them into practice. The mind can make the body act honorably, make the body tell the truth, understand what is true. It can reason to a logical end, have a goal, have an ideal. Matter can't do that. It can come up with things like poetry and art. Again, these things transcend matter. If materialism were true, there would be an accounting for intellectual knowledge or free will. Material objects are individual, and intellectual knowledge is founded on universal ideas or concepts. Free will is self-direction, following intellectual judgment. You have in your mind, you can make a choice. Again, the mind is superseding, is overshadowing, taking control of the body. So it's separate. Matter is essentially inert and cannot give self-direction. If materialism were true, then every one of the particles of matter, which we call atoms, would be necessary. Each of them would be necessary. And each of them would be eternal and infinite. Yet we can break up atoms. A thing made up of parts can only amount to the sum of its parts. And if those be infinite, then the parts have to be infinite and never ending, never having a beginning and never having an end. And yet, so the whole sum has to be infinite. But the world is finite. Things in the world come to an end constantly. And you can say, well, but the atoms that still make them up still exist. Yeah. But do all of them still exist? Like I said, we can break atoms. We can demolish them. It releases a whole lot of energy, and that's why we have atomic bombs. But we can do it. So matter can't be infinite. And the fifth proof that materialism is wrong is if materialism were true, then each atom of matter would be necessary and endowed with force or motion. Yet motion is essentially a thing that is given, is communicated, is received. Motion is not self-originated. We can put atoms in motion. Atoms do move, but they don't move by their own power. So the motion of these atoms must be traced. Everything then has to be traced. All the motion that it is in the world has to be traced to the first mover, who put everything into motion, including the atom. So how does an atom get its motion? If nothing but matter exists, motion in matter becomes an utter impossibility. So materialism can't explain how the world came. It has this grandiose idea, but in fact, it falls flat. There's no way you can prove this. In fact, the opposite, you can prove that it's totally false. So materialism cannot account for the creation of the world. It's a nice idea of having primordial soup that, just everything came out of that. But again, where did that come from? It didn't always exist. The other false idea is pantheism. There is but one substance, and this is God. That's what pantheism believes. There's only one thing in the whole universe, and that is God. He's the only thing that exists. You don't exist. You're just a outpouring or a manifestation of God. The world and all things in it are these outpourings, these emanations of divine substance. In other words, the world is to God what sparks are to fire. You have a fire burning and it gives off these little sparks. What are these sparks? They're just little pieces of the wood that is burning floating off into the air. Well, that's you. That's me. We're these sparks coming off from God. But think about that a little bit more. Another way they look at it is that's what we mean by an emanation. They also say it could be a manifestation of God. Like a smile is a manifestation of your mind, what's going on in your mind. Or the wind is a manifestation of what's going on in the atmosphere. So the first type of pantheism is called emanationism, and while the second is called phenomenalism, and it really doesn't matter, those words, they basically come down to the same thing. And there's a third type called idealistic, which is very vague and an abstract doctrine about God as a kind of idea, which comes gradually out of some kind of abstract state of concreteness. And again, none of this is important. First of all, it's all wrong. But you need to know a little bit about it so that if somebody comes to you with has this idea, you can refute it. So all of these forms of pantheism come down to the basic fact that they identify the world with God. That world is part of God. But that doctrine can't be true. Pantheism contradicts reason, first of all. Reason demonstrates the impossibility of a cause producing itself. God can't produce himself. God always was. But God can produce other things, and he can produce the world. So if the world were part of himself, he would be producing himself, which is impossible. Pantheism makes the first cause and necessary being one and the same with the world. That they're the same thing, which is then caused by the first cause and contingent upon the first cause. And as we say, as we go back to the original proof, something, God or the thing that causes everything, the first cause, has to be necessary. It has to be infinite, and it cannot be caused. Because if it was caused by something, then that would be the first cause. So if the world were caused by God, then God is the first cause. But the world can't, and the world can't be an offshoot of God or a part of God, because then it is God, and therefore it is part of the first cause, and it's refuting itself. It's illogical. It's unreasonable. And it teaches a kind of evolution in God. God is evolving. He becomes part of the world, or the world becomes part of him, or the world is an offshoot of him. That an emanation from him, something that comes from him. But again, remember that God, to be God, has to be immutable. That is without change. So the world changes. And even if this were an emanation from God, that would be a change in God. That can't be. Something that God, it shows a change in an immutable necessary being, which is impossible. Or a growth in a perfect being. How could something perfect be more perfect? It defies the definition of perfection. So, again, this is all impossible and is totally unreasonable. So, we can throw pantheism out and just by the very fact that it's unreasonable. But it also contradicts consciousness. Each of us recognizes himself as an individual distinct from each other. You are not the same as I am, and I am not the same as she is, and she's not the same as Camille. They think differently, they look differently, they have different goals, they have different likes and dislikes. You know, I don't like Mexican food, and I know most of you do, because I heard that comment way back from one of the first classes I had. I don't, but that doesn't matter. So each of us are individuals, distinct from each other. The consciousness must be deceiving if pantheism is true, for then we're nothing but emanations or parts of God. We're all parts of the same thing then. And if we're all parts of the same thing, aren't we all then the same? If consciousness all comes from God's consciousness, then we should all have a shared consciousness. We should all understand and perceive things the same way. If consciousness so deceives us, we must not trust it at all. So we cannot be sure of anything that we perceive by reason. So all doctrines, including pantheism itself, become utterly futile and uncertain, because now we can't trust anything. Pantheism would lead to unthinkable consequences if it was used in practical life, because it destroys personality. And it makes all men one with another and with God. You are me, and I am you, and we're all part of God. Think of that about that. I don't want to be you, and I know you don't want to be me. And I wouldn't mind being, one with God, but we have to achieve that goal by ourselves, by increase of grace, by example, by following His example, as Father said today. But we're separate from Him. Because, again, we're sinful nature, and if we're sinful nature and we're part of God, that means God has sin in Him? Again, that's a contradiction. He's perfect, and that's an imperfection. We're imperfect. How can we be a part of God, who is perfect? Thus, there can be no individual free will. It's not if you're a part of God. Your choices aren't your own. You can blame everything on God. There's no individual responsibility. There's no crime. For all human actions are God's actions, and God can't commit a crime. So there can't be any crime. So you can do whatever you want, and it's okay. And nobody can arrest you for it. Yeah, try that. See how far you get. Go rob a convenience store and see how far you get. And you can go to court and say, but there is no such thing as crime because they're not going to buy that. So it's unreasonable, it's illogical, and it's a total contradiction. If we reject materialism and pantheism, what are we left with? We're left with the doctrine that the world was produced by creation, with what we call creationism. This doctrine then has to be true. The only thing left. The other two, there's only these three possibilities, and these two are wrong. So that the only one left is creation, and that the world was created by God. So what does creation? What does that mean? Creation is to produce something out of nothing. People often say, well, she created a beautiful cake. No, she didn't create the cake. She made the cake, but she didn't create it out of nothing. She used flour, she used chocolate, she used whatever, milk, eggs, whatever. But she didn't create it out of nothing. To create is to make out of nothing, and there's only one person that can do that, and that is God. A carpenter who creates a table doesn't create the table, he makes it out of wood. He uses a hammer, he uses nails or pegs or whatever, he uses a varnish or saw, but he uses equipment and materials. So he uses pre-existing materials. To create is to take something, make it out of nothing. There's no pre-existing, there's no primordial soup, there's nothing. Now he can make the primordial soup and then send it on its way to begin creating, turning other things. But that has to come from something, and that something has to be God. So creation is to produce something from non-existing materials, to create something entirely and completely out of nothing. So here's the world, live in it, that's a fact. When we ask how the world got to be here, we have to say it was caused, we can't say that it caused itself, or we can't say that it's an outpouring of God, or that it was eternal and uncaused. So the only answer that is left is that it was created. And if it was created, then it had to come from God. So we don't need to offer any positive proof for the fact of creation. The very fact that it's here is proof of itself. Whatever is found in the thing belongs to that thing by necessity. For example, a piece of iron is hot, and so we know that the iron is hot because you can touch it and you can feel that it's hot. Where did it get hot? How did it get hot? Where did the heat come from? The heat was communicated to it from a fire. That's how it got hot. Iron by itself, just sitting in the air, doesn't get hot. So if it is hot, it has to get the heat from something. And so if you can see it sitting over a fire, so obviously the fire gave it the heat. Therefore, when other things are found to possess an attribute or existence, it follows that existence was given to them from something else, which was caused by God. Again, you're following the cause back. How did the iron get hot? From the fire. Where did the fire come from? You know, from sparks, electricity, lightning, whatever. Where did that come from? Again, you're falling back. It ultimately always goes back to God. So, how did God produce the world? Not out of his own substance. It is not God. It's not a part of God. For he is infinite and immutable, unchangeable. And not out of some other substance, because there were no other substances when he created the world. There was just God. The end, that's it. So he made it, so if the world exists and there was only God, he had to make it, and he had to make it out of nothing, because there wasn't anything else. And it couldn't be him. The world can't be him. We've already established that. So it had to come from nothing. Whether the world was developed out of other substances into its present form or was made just as we see it, doesn't matter. The world was created. By that we mean that did God instantly decide that the whole universe exists the way you see it right now, and it just came to be right now? Our sun with our Earth revolving around and all the other galaxies, all the other planets, our moon, or whether it started out with a Big Bang or a primordial soup, or a group of planets, a universe which is constantly expanding, as some scientists will say, doesn't matter. Whether he just sets the ball rolling on this course, or whether he conceived everything and made it the way it is right now in 1 second. Or if you spend 7 days doing it. And who knows how long a day is. Again, time doesn't exist with God. The days are our reckoning. So, but again, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that he did it, and it came from nothing. Whether it was instantly or over a long period of time, doesn't matter. Now, God freely chose to create. Since, again, he's perfect, and he's utterly free to do what he wants to do, and he's no-wise constrained to act in any way. The fact that he made the world means he chose to make the world. He was free to make it or not make it, and he chose to make it. So, the fact that he chose to make it means that he has a purpose or an end for making it. There was a reason. God doesn't do anything without a reason. Why? Because, again, he's perfect, and therefore he's reasonable. And so he has a reason to do things. We're the unreasonable ones. Sometimes we do things for no reason. But God always has a reason when he does. So the fact that he chose to make the world means he had a reason for making the world. A purpose for creating it. Because, again, he's very wise, and to not have a reason would be to be unwise. Now, God could have made creatures for themselves, creatures who are utterly contingent and cannot be an end in themselves. They have nothing but being, nothing but value, nothing of value, to serve an end except the one that God gave them. God gave everything in the world a purpose. The plants are there for a reason. Well, what purpose do plants serve? That's the way you should ask it. What purpose do plants serve? Food for animals, make oxygen for the air so the animals can breathe, to fertilize the soil so other plants can grow. There's a purpose. Why did he make animals? They serve a purpose too. They also fertilize the earth to help plants grow. They serve as food for other animals. Sometimes they're pollinators for plants. Sometimes they help keep other animals from becoming too overstocked. Predators keep animals within a certain range, and they serve as food for us. So he made us. What purpose do we serve? Everything has to have a purpose. It must be then that God in creating acts towards himself. All of these things serve a purpose, but the ultimate purpose of the plants, the animals, the minerals, and man always goes back to himself. God did not make all of these. Yes, the plants help the animals, and the animals help man. But man, what's the purpose for man? It all goes back to him. Because man needs the animals and the plants, God made them because God wanted man to serve him. It's a circle. Ultimately, it all goes back to him. Even the plants and animals serve God in their way. They give him honor and glory by their existence, but because they're there to serve man, and man is the ultimate thing that God wanted, the service that God wanted. It must be then that in creating, he acts towards himself. So God is not only the first efficient cause of creatures, he's also their last end and the final cause for which all creations exist. They all exist to serve God. God is their beginning and God is their end. He's the reason why they exist, and their existence is for him alone. God creates for his own external and formal and objective glory. All of it serves for the honor and glory of God. In this bodily world, the chief creature is man. Man alone has a spiritual and an immortal soul, and a free will. Other creatures exist to help man maintain life and to achieve a measure of happiness here. They exist to help man to live his life on earth in a manner suitable for him to win happiness for eternity. That man has a spiritual and immortal soul and a free will is proved by rational psychology, which we're not going into in this course. That's a whole different course of study, maybe some other year. Don't bet on that. Apologetics can give a brief argument for the existence of spiritual and immortal soul and free will. When we talk about spiritual and immortal soul and free will, again, that's the realm of rational psychology. Why do we do what we do? So we're only going to touch the tip of that iceberg, just enough to get through what we need to know for apologetics. If you want to go into more detail, that's a whole college course. Yeah. So man has a spiritual soul. These are the points that rational psychology is talking about. So man has a spiritual soul. that which exists, that, in other words, spiritual, that is not material, functions in itself as spiritual. We talked about this when we talked about God being spiritual, being simple. That but the action of a thing manifests its nature. And again, we talk attributes. What you are, you can see what something is by how they act. What are your attributes? What are the attributes of God? We can see the attributes of God in His actions in the world, how they affect us. And no effect can exceed its cause in excellence or perfection. In other words, an effect of something can never be greater than whatever caused it. So God can create man, which is an effect, but man can never be greater than God who created him. The soul of man exercises spiritual functions. It can reason. It can have ideals. And, again, the things that we talked about earlier. It's aware of things. It's aware of such non-material things as beauty, goodness, truth, ideals, and it can strive for these things. It has self-consciousness. In other words, it knows, it can think about itself. Animals don't think about themselves. If you ever, they think about their children. They don't think about themselves. Am I doing God's will? Could I live a better life? Am I happy? No, animals don't think that way. So we have a self-consciousness by which we can reflect upon things that are not necessarily material. The eye does not see itself seeing. The soul can think of itself thinking, but the soul can think of itself thinking. It can know that it is thinking, that it's knowing something. It can study it. It can inquire into it. But the soul exercises spiritual functions, and therefore it is spiritual. Again, this is a different plateau than the material plateau, the world that animals and plants live on. You have a soul, and it is that soul that lets you do these things. And that soul is immortal. It's, again, because it is spiritual, it has to be simple. It has to be one thing, not composed of parts. So man is spiritual and not made up of parts in his soul. But what is not made up of parts can't be separated into parts. So you can't divide the soul. So man's soul cannot die. Man's body is made up of parts, and he can die and separate into parts, deteriorate, and become dust again. But man's soul is not made up of parts, so it can't die, because it can't be torn apart. It can't be separated. It has to be immortal. And lastly, man has to have free will. Man is possessed of an indestructible conviction that he is the author of his own acts, and that he can freely choose what he wants to do or not do. You all have this conviction, don't you? I mean, I can tell you, I want you to scrub the floor here. You can say, no, this Sunday I can't work today. I'm going to go home. No, if I have to scrub the floor, I'll go home and scrub my mom's floor. You can freely choose to do something or not to choose to do it. You have free will. And man is conscious of his own responsibility. You know when you have to do something, that you're responsible for doing something. Parents take care of their children not because it's an instinct the way the animals do it, but because they feel the responsibility. And they feel the guilt when they don't do it right. That they're not raising their kids right. he can reproach himself when he hasn't done something wrong. Again, that guilt. You can approve of the conduct of others. You can see how others make choices, and you can approve or not approve of it. You don't see that among animals. Oh, this mother cat is looking at the way that mother cat's raising her kids. You're not doing it right. No, cats don't do that. If this consciousness be deceiving, then there's no truth to be had by human means at all. And there can therefore be no learning, no science, no certainty of anything. If man isn't free in his choice of his own individual human actions, then why make laws? Why have a government? That would be absurd. If man isn't free to make a choice, then you don't need you don't need a government. You don't need laws, because laws wouldn't change anything, because you're not free to choose or not choose. So all human law is based upon the fact that man is free, that you have freedom. Laws are made for men, for only an agent who can break a law is free to keep a law. Conviction of man's freedom is as universal as the conviction that the world exists. There is nobody in the world. You cannot find a single individual, no matter where you go, unless they're a total idiot. And by that I mean you're mentally off or, defective. They have to be mentally defective, or they will believe in freedom, that they have free will, that they can make choices. I mean, our country was founded on this whole concept, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Again, freedom. That man is free, and he has the choice. Man is therefore has to have free will. So man has to have a soul. Man has to be, that soul has to be immortal, and man has to have free will. That's the logic behind it. So since man alone in all the world creatures has these three parts, if you want to put it that way, excellences of spiritual and immortal soul and free will, man is therefore the most perfect, the chief, the most important of all the creations that God made. In other words, everything then must have been made for man. That man was the end. That all of the world was created for man. But again, why did he create man? God created for himself. When everything you do, everything we do in our lives, don't we do it for ourselves? Ultimately, we hope to gain something from it. Parents hope to gain good kids that will end up growing up and helping them in their old age. Not shoving them out the door to a homeless shelter or something like that. Everything you do in your life, you study. Why? So you can get an education. Why? So you can get a good job. Why? So you can make money. Everything you do for yourself, or usually it's for yourself. Comes back to us. We're very selfish creatures. But really, yes, we do it for ourselves. So God did it also, but he did it for himself. But his act was not selfish. It was unselfish. He made us for himself, knowing full well that we were going to mar the whole process. He knew that we would sin. He knew. Why? He knows everything. There's no time with God. And that moment of creation, he saw all the moments of creation. He saw Adam. He saw crucifixion. He saw us in the same moment. So God's act was totally unselfish. He created us for himself, knowing full well that a lot of us would not serve. We would be like Satan, say, I will not. Okay, so that's creation. Why the world came to be, why, and the false ideas concerning it. So, any questions? Okay, no questions? We never have any questions. We walk right past it. We're done now. I'll edit that out.